The first one I want to introduce is Dr. Art Robinson. Now, if you'll look in your bios, you'll see that he has lots of credentials. The man is just plain smart. And he lost his wife when his fifth child was 2 years old, and so, six children, lost his wife when his youngest was 2 years old. And you can imagine, you know what he ended up doing is homeschooling those 6 children. Now, would you also believe that 3 of them now are working with him as scientists themselves? But the reason, yes, I mean, he evidently did a pretty good job, and I think it says a lot for homeschooling. Might say a lot for genes too, but I'm not sure. But Dr. Robinson, the reason that I am so impressed and why what I'd like you to pay attention to is, have you ever thought of, with this global warming and the different aspects of some of the things that we're against, and you wonder how people can actually manipulate things and to lie and have an agenda that can be so destructive? Well, when I read about Dr. Robinson, I realized one reason why, and Rosa gave you another one. These people can be very vicious, and they go after you in a very personal way that jeopardizes your very job and your very life. And Dr. Robinson is going to explain a little bit of that to you right now.
It's okay if I take this off? No, I'll leave it there. All right. Thank you very much. It's really a great privilege to speak to the Eagle Forum. Our country is a much different place than it would have been had Phyllis Schlafly and all of you not done what you've done over the last few decades. I'm a scientist. I came to California first to go to Caltech, to undergraduate school. Then I went to graduate school at UC San Diego. I taught on the faculty there for some years. Then I helped found a research institute in Menlo Park, and I married a scientist, a very wonderful woman who worked beside me for 17 years. We decided we'd like to raise our children on a farm in the country, and we couldn't afford one in California, so we moved to Oregon 30 years ago. We lived just over the border, about 10 miles in southwest Oregon. And I've just had fun in science. It's been a wonderful life. I greatly enjoy it. We've done a little medical research and a lot of basic science work. But 3 times we departed from that and did things of political, sort of political things. The first was during the Cold War. Like so many Americans, we were very worried about the Cold War, and we stopped for several years and worked on the subject of civil defense. In fact, the first time I ever saw Phyllis Schlafly was at the only convention I've ever been to. It was in the Republican Convention in 1988. When Dr. Teller and I went there, he argued for strategic defense and I for civil defense. And we wrote the platform planks that year. That may be the only things we wrote that were written by anybody but Phyllis Schlafly. She ran the whole convention, and they had a wonderful platform. It was fabulous to see what she was doing. After we moved to Oregon and lived there for a few years, my wife died, and so my 6 children sort of had to raise themselves. They were raised by the Lord, and I ran errands, and they taught themselves too, and they started a homeschool curriculum mimicking what they'd done, and they have 60,000 students around the country now. They're very accomplished young people, but. And they grew up and went to school, learned some science. 5 of them had degrees in chemistry and 1 in math. And as they became older, we started to work together in the laboratories that we'd established there. And the subject of global warming was coming up when Gore was vice president. And it was accidental, but the Wall Street Journal asked me to write the editorial they ran during the Kyoto meeting. I did this. It was a simple editorial about the subject. But the enviros attacked us so vigorously that they got our attention. So we decided to do a little more, and we understood that one of the central tenets of these people was that a consensus of scientists agreed with them. Almost all the scientists agreed with them. You remember, Gore's been telling us this for a long time. So we decided to demonstrate the truth of this. So we stopped our work for 6 months and read everything we could find on the subject, all the scientific literature with the help of some colleagues at Harvard and Rockefeller University. And we wrote what scientists call a review paper, a definitive review of the research literature on this, and then sent it out along with a petition to many of our colleagues. The petition urged the U.S. government not to take any action on the subject of human-caused global warming because it was not a correct hypothesis, and also pointed out that carbon dioxide is very good for the environment. It makes plants grow faster. We get more plants than animals. And we do have a lot more today because of the increased carbon dioxide. Anyway, 17,000 Americans with university degrees in physical science signed that petition, and it caused a lot of trouble for the enviros, and we're pleased that it did. We then stopped and went back to our work. We didn't have the ability to implement this. We just provided this one tool to our colleagues. The matter came up again 10 years ago, a few years ago, as they made more progress. So we stopped again for 6 months. My sons and I did the same thing over, had to rewrite the review article because of the extra 10 years of research, and this time we got 32,000 signatures. Now that doesn't mean, remember, this is not science by vote. In science, one man can be right, everybody can be wrong, except the one man. All it demonstrated was they don't have a consensus. If a guy living on a farm in Oregon can find 32,000 American scientists, including 9,000 PhDs, that don't agree with them, there's no consensus. And that's what we demonstrated. We then continued our research work. The children went to graduate school. 3 of them are finished, and 3 are still working there. But about a year and a half ago, we got interested again. We went to a town hall meeting held by our local congressman, a progressive socialist named Peter DeFazio, and we came home and shaking our heads and said, that's just awful. Somebody's got to replace this guy. And we talked about it a while, and I, being slower on my feet than my sons, wound up as the candidate. And so we decided to run against this guy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that because it's a point I want to make, one point I want to make today in this talk. The experience was an unusual one. Now, the politics of the matter are fairly simple. I won't lecture to you about political issues. Any one of you could talk to me more effectively, perhaps, than I could talk to you. But we understand the problems that face our nation. You're talking about many of them here. I have personal views on this. I believe that the most important political issue in our country is the right to life issue, because I don't believe we'll be allowed to solve the other issues unless we solve that one properly. And of course, there are many promising and things to be optimistic about. The states' rights movements in many states today are a very, very fine thing, and you heard about that from the sheriff. It's a very, very positive thing, and it will do a lot of good. And of course, the work of organizations like this across the board on the many issues that concern you are of value. But we shouldn't forget about the United States Congress. The United States Congress has our country today, at least not perhaps morally or spiritually, but certainly economically and in many other ways, is overrun by taxation, regulation, and litigation, which has basically shut down our economy or augurs very poorly for our country. And you realize that a huge bureaucracy has arisen, which has regulated away, totally away, some of our industries, regulated away our nuclear power industry, crimped and damaged our hydrocarbon power industry. It's done terrible damage to the country. And all of this is centered in the United States Congress. The U.S. Congress has total power over the expenditures of our government. Obama can't pay the water bill at the White House unless they give him the money. They fund everything, and they can control everything in that government. We have many agencies in the government that are unconstitutional, from the Education Department to the Environmental Protection Agency. All of these things are delegated to the states and the people in the Constitution. They're no business to the federal government. We have an Energy Department that Jimmy Carter started to get us off foreign oil. That didn't work very well, and it should be closed too. These regulatory agencies, if we close some of them, would be the greatest tax break for the American people have ever experienced. But the taxation, regulation, litigation, the things which are funded by our Congress are shutting our country down. Now, how can we fix this? Well, I know one simple way to fix it. It's not constitutional, but illustrates the point. I could go down on the streets of Cave Junction, just start pointing at people one by one as they walk past. After I got to 435, put them in and throw the guys that are in there out, and the problem would be fine. And I could get the homeless people besides. I mean, it wouldn't matter. Because any selection of 435 Americans would have the wisdom not to spend twice as much money as they have. They would have the wisdom not to run a Social Security system on the same premise that put Bernie Madoff in jail. They simply wouldn't do that. A few of them might try, but as a majority, they wouldn't. Any ordinary group of common sense Americans could solve this problem. Now, that's not the way we do things. We elect Congress people. And that's a good idea, too. But how do you do this? You need people who you think can have some leadership ability. You need people that can get along, do the right thing. The main thing you have to worry about is whether they'll do what they say they'll do when they get in office. And we have a mess up there. Now, I can tell you exactly how to find a congressperson who will do exactly what you want to do. Go home and look in the mirror. Every one of you would do it. And I think it's probably not an exaggeration to say that there's not a person in this room that wouldn't be 10 times better than the average congressman we've got in Washington today. These guys are still discussing the question of whether they'll spend twice as much money this year as they take in. It's insanity, and the country's been bankrupted by it. So that's kind of the exercise we performed. Now, the experience was an interesting one, and I think I'll tell you a little about it because it's probably the same experience you'll have if you go home and look in the mirror and do that. I assure you that if 4,000 people that work with the Eagle Forum were to run for congressional office in the primaries next year, this would turn into a different country because a lot of them would win, and we might be able to take the Congress back in one more election. As it is, it may take 2 or 3 more before we get enough principled people. We decided to do this. I don't think there were 100 people in Oregon who even knew who we were, and not one of them had ever considered electing us to office. I certainly never thought of running. But it was like walking into a movie, and not because of me, just because we started talking to people. And listen, the American people, in majority, agree with the people in this room. They do. So we filed the day before the filing date was to close, and we ran in the primary, got the Republican nomination. Then we ran in the independent primary, got the independent primary nomination. Then the Constitution Party had its convention, they nominated us. Then the Libertarian Party had their nomination, they nominated us. We had all 4 nominations. In Oregon, you can have all the nominations you want. The Tea Party people all came out and started working for us, and it was unbelievable. We went from 0 name recognition up to pretty good, and we won 44% of the vote in the election in a Democrat district. And we hope in 2012 to get the extra 6%. We're running against a hardcore progressive socialist who's been in office for 25 years. Now, that's quite a game. I can tell you it's a lot of fun, but you have to get earplugs. If I believed 5% of what they said about me, I wouldn't have dinner with myself. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. Anyway, just have to turn the TV off and not watch them, and I don't watch much TV anyway. Every time I turned the TV on, there was the Fazio again with something that they'd focus grouped and polled, and it didn't. I didn't see how it bore any relation with me, but that's where I was. But I'm not kidding. The people have to take the Congress back. It is central to the control of our government. It controls every penny our government spends. If you control the money, you control the government. This government needs to be about 1/4 the size it is and go back to a constitutional republic. But that's not what we have today. We have a government that's taking our freedom away, taking our liberty away, destroying our economy because it's doing it, also damaging and destroying our lives. And it has to be taken back, and that's the place to do it. We all focus on the president, a lot of the bureaucracy, all these things, but the Congress controls all the money. The founders intended that our Congress be made up of ordinary people, ordinary Americans who had a duty to go and kind of volunteer for a while. The idea was some guys would get together and say to one of their friends, you got to go up there and do this now. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I got better things to do. And they'd talk him into running, and some other guys would talk their friend into running, and you get citizen legislators. And that's what we were supposed to have. The thing we have today now is professional politicians. And as soon as these people are professional politicians, they make their decisions on the basis of what's good for them instead of what's good for the country. And they forget quickly about their obligation to support the constitutional republic. And we have a bunch of professional politicians making these decisions, and it's awful. And we won't change our federal government until we do that, and it's not hard to do. Because the experience I had in last year showed me that almost anyone who has his head screwed on right and can represent the thoughts that the majority of the American people have today, it can have a good chance. And if there are several of us, one of them is going to be selected. I've watched this movement grow. I'd never been to a Tea Party meeting in my life until I ran for office. I hadn't been to any of these meetings. Nobody knew me from Adam. But I've spoken about 200 times in the district now, and I know it pretty well. Our district, incidentally, is about the size of the country of Switzerland. It has about 10% as many people, and people are the ultimate resource. But also has some disadvantages. The corporate taxes in Switzerland run around 14%, and ours run between 41 and 47%. And in many other ways, our people are economically less free than the people of Switzerland. District 4 is not only the size of Switzerland, it's far richer in natural resources. Its farmland, its forests, its mineral resources all exceed those of Switzerland. But because of the lack of freedom that's been impressed upon it by our government unconstitutionally, the economy is a little different. The average, the median family income in Switzerland is $100,000, and in my district it's $36,000. So there are differences, but we can correct that difference if we can gain back the liberty that enabled Americans to be exceptional in the past. The important thing is that people who want to preserve our constitutional republic be elected to office, and every one of you in this room has the ability to do that. And I think if we would do that, we could fix the problems in Washington. And until we do that, I don't think we can. The manifestations of these, I won't take a long time or give you a campaign speech, but take the energy industry. Sitting outside Phoenix is the Palo Verde nuclear power station. Palo Verde was intended to have 10 nuclear reactors. It has 3 because it was shut down partway through construction. Each of the nuclear reactors that Palo Verde produces twice the power of Hoover Dam. Palo Verde is 6 Hoover Dams. It was intended to be 20 Hoover Dams. And the nuclear power industry in 1975 expected that it would build the equivalent of 1 Palo Verde in each state during the next 25 years. Had that been done, there would be the equivalent electricity generation per state of 20 Hoover Dams, and the country would be exporting $300 billion worth of energy a year instead of importing $600 billion worth. Alternatively, you could shut down the nuclear power industry, and that's what they've done, and take the taxes that these industries pay and put them in Washington and let guys like Barack Obama and Pete DeFazio decide how the money will be spent. And they build solar power plants. Sitting in Florida today is a good example of that. A year and a half ago, the largest solar power plant ever built in this country was opened in Florida. Obama gave a grand speech. It's the wave of the future. The plant works. It produces $3 million worth of electricity a year, and it costs $150 million to build. So 50 years from now, if they can run that plant for nothing and the equipment doesn't wear out, it will generate its first net watt of power. It's nothing but a big billboard for the green industry. But I don't advocate nuclear power. I don't advocate hydrocarbon power in particular, although I've worked against the lies that have been told about them. I advocate only what America was created for, a free market where free men and women can compete to do their best. If we had a free market, everything should compete on a level playing field. You want to burn termites to make energy? Do it. You can do anything you want out there if we would just simply get the government out of the way, get the regulatory burden out of the way, get the tax burden out of the way. They wouldn't be able to run the power plants in France because every technologist in France would be on airplanes coming to the United States trying to build energy technology. The United States energy problem can be solved in an instant without any public capital or whatever. Just get the government out of the way. And that's the problem our industries have across the country. In the last 10 years, America has lost 50,000 factories, employing an average of 2,400 men. Each day, and it's lost many more men. Each day, it's lost 12 factories, employing 2,400 men. For the last 20, yes, each day, 2,400 men, 12 factories, every day for the last 10 years. So we have half as much manufacturing as we had 10 years ago. We continue on this path. If you don't make things, you lose your prosperity, and that's where we're going. And we will continue to go down that path unless we get the Congress back. Congress has to be returned to the people so that it will get the regulatory and tax litigation burden off the back of the American worker so that he can compete in the world. And we're all going to see the level of our prosperity drop with all the politicians giving us other excuses as we do if we don't solve this problem. There are enough people in this room probably to take half of California back, and this is what needs to be done. So she asked me to stop ahead of time for questions, so I'll do that. But all I am is a scientist. I plan to spend my life in my laboratory. I got mixed up in these three political issues, and it's been interesting to see that the third one was only because I'm like every other American. We're so alarmed. People are coming out of the walls and starting to do something. And I think I know what the future holds, because at least in my district, those people are madder now than they were last year. They're going to be madder next year than they were this year. And over the next 10 years, the Congress will be taken back. And most of us will be able to tell our children and grandchildren that we were here when it happened. So I think the future is optimistic because the people are going to take back control of their government from the apparatchiks who currently hold us in bondage. Thanks.
Well, you know, one of the things, though, that I was going to explain to everybody, and that's why he didn't, I think, is that, remember I said that when people do choose to take a stand, they get into trouble. And what happened to him is that the University of Oregon... No, it's wrong. Let me tell him. I meant Oregon State. Okay. Oregon State. My son with the University of Oregon, they'd never have done this. Yeah, okay.
This is a special issue. I don't want to make a mistake because it'd be bad. If you run for office, you find out they do a lot of things to you. And in this case, 3 of my kids weren't through school yet. They were all graduate students in nuclear engineering at Oregon State. And 2 days after the election, we learned that some of the administrators at Oregon State would prefer they didn't get their degrees there. So they set out to stop them by many administrative procedures. A faculty member at the university, Jack Higginbotham, stepped forth to save them. He saw what was going on. He saw the moves behind the scenes to make sure because Robinson kids were more popular during the election than I was, and DeFazio would certainly be happy to get rid of them. But this faculty member, who was not only a 24-year member of the faculty, but he was president of the faculty senate. He still is. And as soon as he stepped forth to help my kids, they tried to throw him out of the university too. We fought him behind the scenes for about 3 months, and we were losing, so we told the public about it. And the university received thousands of phone calls of inquiries, and that slowed them down and saved Professor Higginbotham and the students from being expelled, but they're still fighting. And more recently, the dean of the graduate school stepped forth to help the students, so now they're after her too. This is academia. And it's in this case, that university is totally controlled by the Democrat machine in our district. It got $27 million in earmark funding last session from the Democrats. So you have a pretty formidable political forces that can affect you in many, many different ways. In our case, this is what happened. I took the occasion to do it because I didn't want you to name the wrong university.
Which I started. Well, and the reason I wanted to is for two reasons. One, the biggest one is he continually was telling us the importance of all of us running and making a difference and stepping out, and that's really important. But and for those of you that are thinking about doing so, I know I had at one time been asked to do it and was almost on the, I was going to do it, and I found out how much money it costs and how much of your time it takes. And I just thought, I can't do that for my family. Well, turns out that you heard a little bit about this new situation, a new system that Phyllis has purchased and making it something very doable. It will be doable. And it's only going to be available for Eagle Forum, anybody that's going through Phyllis and going through that channel. So this is an opportunity that maybe some of you have considered doing and were like me, didn't because of those reasons. Well, you know what? It's a new ball game. We may be able, all of us in this room, every single one of you that have ever considered it might have an opportunity. So I want you not to dismiss what he's saying too quickly. And also, if you can't, because of whatever reasons, I wanted him to tell that story because it was you, people like you, that saved his job, that saved his children's job, and Dr. Higginbotham's job. And so I want to, I think it would be good if we had some kind of a system where we could have those action alerts. That's my job with Eagle Forum, coincidentally. And I do believe in the power of that communication, of my being able to get that information to you and exactly what you should do so that you could say, in his case, send a message to the university or give them a call or send a letter or communicate fax. So if you would like to be on that action alert, would you take my email address down and email me, and then I will put you on the list, and you'll get those action alerts for people exactly like Dr. Robinson. It's BONEIL at me.com. Very easy. Okay? And you send me that, and I will put you on the list.